Lawrence Schechtman, we are here about the PIP claims.
I am a licensed chiropractor. I treated patients with real injuries.
Those accidents were staged, the patients were coached.
Once is a mistake, twice is suspicious. Lawrence Schechtman did this hundreds of times across 6 years and left a paper trail for every single one.
I treated what patients reported to me. That is my job.
$2.4 million, Operation Settlehammer, 92 defendants.
He had a license. He had a Parkland clinic. He had a waiting room full of patients who had never actually been hurt. For more than 6 years, Lawrence Schechtman treated injuries that did not exist. The people on his adjustment table had been recruited into staged car crashes on Broward County streets. They had been coached on what to tell the responding officer. They had been coached on what to say to the insurance adjuster. They had been coached on which body parts to grab and which words to use. Schechtman, with his chiropractic license and his prescription pad, signed off on every single one. By the time Operation Sledgehammer reached his front door, his clinic had pushed $2.4 million in fraudulent claims through Florida's no-fault system. 52 months in federal prison was waiting for him. Quick question before we get into this one. How many of the people you trust with your medical care do you actually know anything about beyond the diploma on the wall? Drop your honest answer in the comments. And if you are not subscribed yet, this is the kind of case we cover every single week. Hit the button. The story gets much worse from here. Lawrence Schechtman was born in 1968 in a working-class corner of the Northeast, the son of a small business owner and a bookkeeper. The family relocated to South Florida when he was 9, settling first in a stucco ranch house in Coral Springs, and then, by the late 1970s, into the kind of newly developed Broward County subdivision, where the streets were named after birds and the lawns were watered on a schedule posted at the entrance gate. He was a quiet kid. His 6th grade teacher described him as studious, careful, and polite to a fault. He played junior varsity tennis. He took apart the family television set in 1981 and put it back together over a weekend, and the story became one of those family anecdotes that gets retold at every holiday for the next 30 years. He graduated from a Broward County public high school in 1986, ranked in the top quarter of his class. He was not a star. He was not a troublemaker. He was the kid in the second row who turned in his homework on time. He enrolled at Florida Atlantic University in the fall of 1986 and majored in biology with a pre-health track. His grades were good, but not exceptional. His parents wanted him to apply to medical school. He told them, his freshman year, that he had no interest in medical school. He wanted, he said, to do something with his hands, something he could see working in real time, something he could explain to a patient in a single visit. He found chiropractic during his sophomore year, after a tennis injury sent him to a practitioner in Boca Raton, who spent 45 minutes explaining the spine to him on a model skeleton. The conversation changed the trajectory of his life. He applied to chiropractic school in his senior year. He was accepted at Palmer College of Chiropractic's Florida campus in Port Orange, and he started the program in the fall of 1990. He graduated in 1994. He passed his board exams the same year and obtained his Florida chiropractic license that December. He worked for 2 years as an associate at an established practice in Pompano Beach, learning the business side of running a clinic. He learned how billing codes worked. He learned which insurance companies paid promptly and which ones dragged out claims for 90 days. He learned the rhythm of Florida's no-fault insurance system, the steady drip of personal injury protection, claims that kept the lights on at clinics from Key West to Jacksonville. In 1997, he opened his own practice on University Drive in Parkland, in a strip plaza between a dry cleaner and a Carvel ice cream shop. He called it Schechtman Chiropractic and Wellness. The waiting room had 4 upholstered chairs and a fish tank. The reception desk was staffed, at first, by his wife Rachel, whom he had married 2 years earlier, and who handled the books while he handled the patients. They had their first child, a daughter, in 1999. Their son arrived in 2002. By the early 2000s, the Schechtmans had moved into a 4-bedroom house in a Parkland subdivision with mature palm trees and a community pool. The kids went to private school. Rachel left the front desk to a hired receptionist and went back to school for an interior design certificate. Lawrence served 2 terms on the Parkland Chamber of Commerce. He donated to youth soccer. He sponsored a little league team. By every metric his community could see, he was a small business success story. But by 2006, the math at the clinic had started to change. New chiropractors had opened practices in nearby Coral Springs and Coconut Creek. Insurance companies had tightened their PIP reimbursement schedules. The clinic was still profitable, but the margin was thinner each quarter, and Lawrence Schechtman was about to be introduced to someone who would offer him a solution. To understand what happened next, you have to understand the system Schechtman operated inside. Florida is one of a small number of states that uses a no-fault insurance framework for automobile accidents. Under Florida statute, every driver is required to carry personal injury protection coverage, known as PIP. The minimum is $10,000 per person involved in an accident. That money is paid by the insurance company regardless of who caused the accident. The $10,000 figure sounds modest. In the context of a single accident, it is. But the structure of the law creates an arithmetic problem that South Florida fraud networks figured out a long time before anyone in Tallahassee did. The payout is per person, not per accident. Per person involved in the accident. So, if 7 people are in the 2 vehicles when the collision happens, the total available PIP exposure is $70,000. If you can find a way to legally and credibly fill those 7 seats with people willing to claim injuries, the same single fender bender suddenly becomes a $70,000 payday. PIP claims have to be supported by documentation, specifically treatment notes from a licensed provider. A medical doctor will do, an orthopedist will do. But chiropractors, by Florida law, are also fully authorized to treat soft tissue injuries, to prescribe certain medications, to order imaging, and to bill PIP coverage directly. A chiropractor's signature on a treatment plan is, under the no-fault framework, as good as any other licensed professionals. And chiropractors, unlike emergency room physicians, can see a patient on the morning of the accident, and again 3 days later, and again 7 days after that, and again every week for 12 weeks, generating treatment notes and billing entries for every visit. The clinic visit is the throat of the funnel. Without a licensed provider willing to document soft tissue injuries, the staged accident produces no payable claim. With a licensed provider willing to document those injuries on demand, the staged accident becomes an industrial process. By the mid-2000s, in South Florida, a network of recruiters, drivers, lawyers, and clinics had built exactly that industrial process. What they needed, constantly, was chiropractors willing to look at a healthy human being and write a note that said otherwise. In 2006, a man came into Schechtman's clinic. He was not a patient. He was a recruiter. He sat down across from Schechtman in the small back office that doubled as a consultation room. He explained the arithmetic. He explained the structure. He explained that Schechtman would never have to be in the cars. He would never have to coach anyone. He would never even have to know how the accidents were staged. All he had to do was treat the people who walked through his door. All he had to do was write the notes. The clinic's PIP receipts would increase by a factor of 3. The risk to Lawrence Schechtman, the recruiter said, was almost nothing. Schechtman listened. He did not say yes that afternoon, but he did not say no either. And within a few weeks, the first wave of staged accident patients began appearing on his clinic's appointment schedule. The first staged accident attached to Schechtman's clinic took place on a Saturday morning in October 2006 on a residential street in unincorporated Broward County. 2 cars, 7 people. A driver in the front car, who in the language of the network was the para, the victim. A driver in the rear car, who was the paro, the causer. 5 passengers split between the 2 vehicles, none of whom had any pre-existing relationship to driving anywhere together that morning. They had all been recruited the week before, in living rooms and bar parking lots, by associates of the network who paid them between $500 and $1,000 in cash apiece for their participation. The coaching had taken place over the preceding days. The participants had been told exactly where to sit in the cars, because the physics of a low-speed rear-end collision dictated who could plausibly claim what kind of injury. They had been told what to wear, because the responding officer would record clothing details. They had been told what to say when the officer arrived. The para would say he had been distracted by his phone and had not seen the car in front of him slow down. The para would say she had been driving carefully and had braked for a yellow light. The passengers, all of them, would say their necks hurt, their lower backs hurt, they felt dizzy, they wanted to be checked out by a doctor. They had a chiropractor they used. They would call him themselves. That chiropractor was Lawrence Schechtman. The cars met at a controlled point on a quiet street. The Paro's vehicle, which had been chosen because its airbags would not deploy at low speed, drifted into the rear bumper of the Para's car at perhaps 15 miles per hour. The damage was real, but minor. A cracked taillight, a bumper deformation, enough to be photographed by the responding officer, enough to make a claim plausible. None of the 7 participants had been injured. They had been jostled. That was the entire point. Within 2 hours, they began arriving at Schechtman's Parkland clinic. They came in pairs or in threes. They filled out new patient intake forms describing symptoms that matched the coaching they had received. Neck pain radiating into the shoulders, lower back stiffness, headache, dizziness, tingling in the extremities. The intake forms looked, on paper, identical to the intake forms of any genuine accident victim. The narrative was structurally complete by the time they walked into the building. Schechtman saw them, one after another. He performed the examinations. He documented range of motion deficits. He documented muscle spasm. He documented tenderness on palpation. He prescribed muscle relaxants. He ordered radiographic imaging from a nearby diagnostic facility that was also, it would later turn out, embedded in the network. He scheduled them for follow-up adjustments 2 and 3 times a week for the next 10 to 12 weeks. Every visit generated a billing entry. Every billing entry was submitted to the insurance carrier of record. Every claim was, on its face, an entirely ordinary PIP submission from an entirely ordinary chiropractor on University Drive in Parkland. The first accident produced approximately $58,000 in PIP billings from Schechtman's clinic alone. The second, 3 weeks later, produced $61,000. The third, in November, produced $70,000 exactly, the statutory maximum. The recruiter who had visited Schechtman the previous spring came by the clinic during the 3rd week of December to drop off a holiday card. The card was thick. Schechtman did not open it in the front office. He took it to the back. Inside, beneath a folded sheet of paper, there was an envelope. Inside the envelope was $12,000 in cash. The first kickback, Christmas of 2006. What followed was 6 years of systematic, escalating, methodical participation. The clinic processed staged accident patients in batches of 5 and 7 and 9. Some weeks there were no staged accident referrals. Other weeks there were 3 separate accidents producing 21 new patient files in a single Monday. Schechtman saw them all. He signed the treatment plans. He approved the imaging. He countersigned the prescriptions filled at the network's preferred pharmacy 2 blocks away. His clinic's annual PIP receipts grew from approximately $140,000 in 2005 to more than $700,000 by 2010. He bought a larger house. He bought a 36-foot sport fishing boat that he kept slipped at a marina in Lighthouse Point. He upgraded his car. He upgraded his wife's car. He paid the children's private school tuition in lump sum annual checks. And he never, in those 6 years, asked the recruiter how the network was finding so many accident victims who somehow all knew to ask for him by name. We are about to get into how the federal government tore this entire architecture apart. Before we do, if you have made it this far, you already know this story is bigger than one chiropractor. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Drop the word sledgehammer in the comments if you want me to cover the other 91 defendants this investigation took down. We do this every single week. Operation Sledgehammer did not start with Lawrence Schechtman. It started with a Palm Beach County car accident in early 2009 that produced a PIP claim file so internally inconsistent that an experienced insurance adjuster flagged it for special investigation. The participants had given statements that contradicted each other on the basic geometry of the collision. The clinic that had treated them had billed for an MRI of a body part that no participant had complained about. The damage to the vehicles was inconsistent with the injuries described in the chart notes. None of these inconsistencies, on its own, would have produced a federal investigation. Together, they produced a referral to the Florida Department of Financial Services, which had been quietly building a database of suspicious PIP claim patterns across the state for nearly 2 years. By the summer of 2009, the Florida CFO's office had identified a clustering pattern: specific clinics, specific recruiters, specific neighborhoods. The clustering crossed county lines: Palm Beach, Miami-Dade, Broward. The state alone did not have the jurisdictional reach to follow it. The state called the FBI's Miami field office. The FBI called IRS Criminal Investigation. The Palm Beach County State Attorney's Office signed on as a state-level prosecutorial partner. By the early fall of 2009, what had begun as a single suspicious claim file in West Palm Beach had become a 4-year joint federal and state investigation with a code name: Operation Sledgehammer. The investigators worked methodically. They subpoenaed claim records from a dozen insurance carriers. They cross-referenced participant names across accident reports. They identified individuals who appeared as passengers or drivers in multiple unrelated accidents in implausible windows. They identified clinics whose patient rosters were saturated with these recurring participants. They mapped the network from the participants outward, the way prosecutors map any conspiracy. Bottom up, until the layer above is identified, and then bottom up again, until the next layer is identified, until you reach the architects. By early 2011, the investigators had identified the recruiter who had walked into Lawrence Schechtman's clinic in 2006. By the middle of 2011, they had identified Schechtman's clinic as a node in the network. By the end of 2011, they had pulled the claim records from his Parkland practice covering the entire conduct period. They had the patient names, they had the dates, they had the diagnostic codes, they had the prescription records from the pharmacy 2 blocks away. They had the billing entries that the clinic had submitted to a dozen insurance carriers across 6 years. And by early 2012, they had what they needed most: cooperators. The first staged accident participant to flip described the coaching process in granular detail: the script for the police interview, the seating arrangement in the cars, the instruction to claim neck pain, the name of the chiropractor who would see them within hours: Lawrence Schechtman, on University Drive in Parkland. The next cooperator confirmed it. The third cooperator added that the chiropractor had never once asked any of them how the accident had happened. The fourth cooperator added that the recruiter had told them, in advance, that Schechtman would not ask. He never did. The case against Schechtman was built on 5 interlocking layers of evidence, and any one of them, standing alone, would have been enough to indict him. The first layer was the clinic's PIP claim records themselves. The investigators worked with insurance carrier representatives to pull every claim Schechtman's clinic had submitted between October 2006 and December 2012. The records produced more than 400 separate patient files associated with accidents that other lines of evidence had already identified as staged. Every one of those files included Schechtman's signed treatment notes. Every one included a documented examination. Every one included a treatment plan. The volume alone was staggering. By 2010 and 2011, Schechtman was personally signing off on the care of more than 50 patients a month, whose only real connection to his clinic was a recruiter's instruction. The second layer was the comparison evidence. The investigators interviewed dozens of the staged accident participants. The cooperators consistently testified that they had not been injured. Their bodies were intact. They had been jostled in a low-speed bump and then driven directly to a clinic where a chiropractor had documented soft tissue injuries that did not exist. When investigators compared what the cooperators reported with what Schechtman's treatment notes claimed, the gap was an abyss. Notes describing significant cervical strain on patients who, by their own admission, had felt nothing. Notes prescribing muscle relaxants for spasm that was not there. The documentation was not merely embellished. It was, in the investigators' eventual language, fabricated. The third layer was the financial reconstruction. IRS criminal investigation agents traced the kickbacks. They traced the deposits. They traced the cash withdrawals and the boat purchase and the jewelry and the home renovations. The clinic's reported income did not match the household's lifestyle, and when the IRS line by line compared the bank statements to the clinic's books, a parallel architecture of unreported cash payments became visible. Cash deposits in patterns that mirrored the timing of the staged accidents. Withdrawals that funded specific large purchases. The kickbacks were not just inferable, they were quantifiable. The fourth layer was the network architecture. Operation Sledgehammer had, by 2012, identified more than 90 individuals who participated in the broader scheme at various levels. Recruiters, stagers, drivers, lawyers, clinic owners, clinic providers, pharmacists. The investigators built an organizational chart that placed Schechtman's clinic at a specific node, with specific connections to specific recruiters, with specific patient flow patterns to and from specific accident locations. The chart was not a theory, it was a map. The fifth layer was the cooperator testimony itself. By the time the federal grand jury convened, the government had cooperators at every level of the network willing to testify against Schechtman directly. Recruiters who had personally visited his clinic, participants who had personally been treated by him, pharmacy employees who had filled his prescriptions for staged patients, office staff who had processed the billing. The cooperator list alone, by early 2013, ran to more than 24 named individuals, each prepared to provide first-hand testimony about Schechtman's knowing role in the scheme. What the investigators did not yet have was Schechtman himself. They had everything around him. They had the architecture, the records, the money, and the witnesses. The last layer was the moment when the chiropractor on University Drive in Parkland would learn that none of it had ever been hidden. It was a Wednesday morning in the early spring of 2013. Schechtman arrived at his clinic at 7:45, the way he had every weekday for 16 years. He parked in the same space at the end of the strip plaza, the one closest to the dumpster corral. He carried a coffee from the bagel shop and a leather messenger bag with the previous evening's chart notes. He unlocked the front door of Schechtman Chiropractic and Wellness. He turned on the lights. He started the coffee pot in the back office. The receptionist was due in at 8:30. At 8:04, 2 unmarked sedans pulled into the strip plaza parking lot. 6 agents got out, 4 FBI, 2 IRS criminal investigation. They walked to the clinic's front door. The lead agent rang the bell. Schechtman opened it himself, expecting an early patient, and stopped when he saw the badges. Lawrence Schechtman? Yes. Special Agent Daniel Reyes, FBI Miami. This is Agent Whitcomb, Agent Ferraro, IRS criminal investigation. We have a federal grand jury subpoena for the records of this clinic, and we have some questions for you. Do you have a minute? Schechtman did not answer for several seconds. Then he said, very quietly, "Do I need a lawyer?" "That is entirely your decision, Mr. Schechtman. We are not arresting you this morning. We are executing a subpoena. We would like to speak with you. You are free to decline. You are free to stop at any time. You are free to consult counsel. I think I should call my lawyer. That is your right. I have nothing to hide." The agent did not respond to that. He simply waited. Schechtman stood in the doorway, holding the door half open with one hand, his other hand still on the inside knob. The fluorescent lights of the clinic waiting room buzzed softly behind him. A small fish tank bubbled in the corner. The agent watched him calculate. "How long have you been investigating me?" "That is not a question I am going to answer this morning, Mr. Schechtman. We are here today to collect the records and to make you aware that this is happening. You will want to speak with an attorney before you say anything further." You should not destroy any documents in this office, on this clinic's computers, or in your home. Do you understand? I understand. We will be back in touch through your attorney. We will need a name and contact number before we leave. Schechtman gave them the name of a Fort Lauderdale criminal defense attorney he had been recommended to by his civil lawyer. The agents took the records. They took the clinic computers. They took the patient files for the 6-year period the subpoena covered. They left a copy of the subpoena and an evidence inventory. They were out of the building by 9:40. The receptionist arrived 20 minutes later to a clinic with an open door, no patient files, and her boss sitting in the consultation room with the lights off, holding his phone in his lap, waiting for his attorney to call him back. He canceled every appointment that day. He never saw another staged accident patient. The clinic, as a node in the network, was finished. The federal indictment came down later that year. Lawrence Schechtman was charged with 1 count of conspiracy to commit mail fraud under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1349, and 4 substantive counts of mail fraud under Title 18, United States Code, Sections 1341 and 2, each count corresponding to a specific fraudulent insurance claim mailing from his clinic to a specific carrier. The total statutory exposure was 80 years. The realistic guideline range, given the dollar amount and the abuse of a licensed position, fell between 46 and 70 months. His attorney negotiated for 9 months. The government had everything. The cooperators were lined up. The financial records spoke for themselves. The plea agreement was finalized in the fall. Guilty plea to all 5 counts. Full cooperation with respect to other Operation Sledgehammer defendants, where his testimony was material. Agreed restitution in the amount of $2,446,906.79. A recommended sentence within the federal guidelines range. Schechtman entered the plea in person at the United States District Court for the Southern District of Florida. He stood at the defense table in a gray suit. He answered the judge's questions in a steady voice. He admitted, under oath, the elements of the offense. He admitted that the patients had not been genuinely injured. He admitted that he had known. He admitted that he had documented treatments and prescribed medications anyway. He admitted that he had submitted, through the United States mail and through interstate wire, fraudulent claims for payment to insurance carriers. The judge accepted the plea. Sentencing took place a few months later. The courtroom was full. The federal prosecutor laid out the conduct in 20 minutes of cold, methodical narration. 6 years. Hundreds of fabricated patient files. More than $2.4 million in fraudulent claims. A licensed professional who had taken an oath to do no harm, and who had instead become a structural pillar in one of the largest staged accident networks in South Florida history. The defense argued mitigation, a clean prior record, a long history of legitimate community contribution, a wife and 2 children, cooperation with the government, acceptance of responsibility. The Fort Lauderdale defense attorney spoke for 30 minutes. He asked the court for a sentence at the bottom of the guideline range. Schechtman spoke last. He stood. He said he was deeply ashamed. He said he had betrayed his profession, his patients, his community, his family. He said he had no excuse. He said he understood the harm he had caused. He said he would accept the court's judgment. United States District Judge Kenneth A. Mara delivered the sentence from the bench. He spoke for some time before pronouncing the term. He said the conduct was a serious abuse of a licensed position. He said the defendant had been given trust by the state of Florida when his license was issued, and trust by the patients who walked through his door, and trust by the insurance system that the state had built on the assumption that licensed providers would behave with integrity. He said the defendant had betrayed that trust at every level. He said the defendant had not been coerced. He said the defendant had not been desperate. He said the defendant had been comfortable and had become greedy and had taught himself, file by file and signature by signature, to look at human beings and see only the dollar value of a fraudulent claim. The judge said that the United States sentencing guidelines existed to ensure that conduct like this received an appropriate measure of accountability, and that a sentence at the bottom of the range would not, in this court's view, reflect the seriousness of what the defendant had done over 6 years. Judge Mara sentenced Lawrence Schechtman to 52 months in federal prison, to be followed by 2 years of supervised release. He ordered restitution in the full amount of $2,446,906.79. Schechtman was permitted to self-surrender. He reported to the Federal Correctional Institution Miami, a low-security facility in Miami-Dade County, in the early summer following sentencing. His Florida chiropractic license was permanently revoked. The Parkland clinic was sold and rebranded under new ownership. The marina slip in Lighthouse Point was given up. The sport fishing boat was sold to pay down a fraction of the restitution. His wife filed for divorce within the year. His children completed high school under a different surname. Operation Sledgehammer continued. By the time the federal government closed the case file on the broader conspiracy, 92 defendants had been convicted across Palm Beach, Miami-Dade, and Broward counties. Doctors, chiropractors, recruiters, lawyers, clinic owners, pharmacists. Lawrence Schechtman was one of them, one specific node in one specific network, one Parkland chiropractor whose license, signature, and prescription pad had been worth $2.4 million to people who knew exactly what to ask him for. This case was calculated. But the case on your screen right now might be the most cold-blooded betrayal of a professional license we have ever covered. Click it. You are not going to forget it.